have an explanation, I promise. So, hi everyone. It's good to be here. I hope you have enjoyed the conference so far. I was just joking with Soup this morning that if they didn't get the projector fixed in time for my talk, it will come along with special effects of someone with low vision. And then we went for lunch and we came back and the projector got worse and I thought like, now we will have low vision and extreme contrast problems. And then we went for a break and came back and they finally fixed the projector, so I guess we wouldn't be having any special effects. So anyway, a bit about myself. My name is Jinny. I work at Carousell, where I lead the platform's engineering team. And today I'd like to talk to you about accessibility. Specifically, visual accessibility. But first, a little bit of history. I was first exposed to the importance of accessibility and voiceover roughly around 2009-2010 or so, when I had the chance to collaborate with one of the most inspiring persons I've had the privilege to meet, named Mr. Yam Tonggu, who was then with the Malaysian Association of the Blind. He invited my company to support one of the accessibility events, and during the event, he showed us how he used voiceover on his iPhone to regain his independence after losing his sight in adulthood. He also shared how the iPhones and Macs are great for accessibility, not just because he had such great voiceover support or that it was full-featured, but that it came baked in and free with every single Mac and iPhone. So I ended up collaborating a few more times with him over the few years after that and started paying more attention to proper accessibility support in iOS apps. After all, it's not hard, right? Apple has done some really incredible work in providing accessibility support on macOS and iOS via VoiceOver, and has provided some really easy-to-use APIs in the form of UI accessibility APIs. And the truth is, for the most part, it's true. Even if you did nothing, iOS will read out the text that's already on your UI elements and do most of the heavy lifting for you. So, for example, if you had a button that said, sign up, VoiceOver will read it out automatically as sign up button. And say you have a UI element that does not contain text, like say a shopping basket button with an icon instead of a text, and you want to make it properly accessible. So, being the good iOS citizen that you are, you add your accessibility label shopping basket, and voila. VoiceOver now says, shopping basket, button. And off you go, making sure your accessibility labels are all in place, you test it out, ship your app, and pat yourself on the back for a job well done, right? Yeah? Yeah, I wish it was so. Well, accessibility is so much more than just making sure that you have your accessibility labels, hints, and values in place. And to be honest, I really don't blame anyone for thinking that this was enough, because while it might be easy to understand why accessibility support is important and to implement it in your apps, it's actually quite difficult to appreciate well-designed accessibility. And for the longest time, this was what I did too, despite all the knowledge and experience that I had previously, until this one fateful weekend last year, when I accidentally became blind for a few days. And well, this is where it gets a bit personal for me as well, because you see, I actually had a condition since I was very young called strabismus. Some of you might know it as a squint. So how does this affect me? Now imagine that for a normal person, their eyes will look like this. Mine looks like this. So my right eye actually turns inwards towards my nose, and as a result of it not being treated when I was young, most of the time my vision is effectively this. In order to prevent double vision, the brain actually shuts down the visual input from the misaligned eye, and over time, if left untreated, it can lead to lazy eye and a loss of vision. So this means I have no binocular vision. Objects appear in a different spot from me from where they actually are. So if you remember that fun fact about me, while I was a kid and I still had vision here, I used to be able to close one eye and things will just, they move. And red-green 3D glasses just tints the world red for me. About a year ago as well, I managed to scratch my good eye and ended up with corneal abrasion, which is basically a scratch on your eye. And it really hurts even when the eye is closed. And light actually makes it sting and burn even worse, so you can't open your eye either. And since I don't already see with my right eye, this means that left eye gone, right eye gone, I'm blind for a weekend. And suddenly I was transported into the world of the unsighted. Well, thank goodness for VoiceOver and Siri, because frankly not because of it, I don't know how I would have survived that weekend. There's only so much I can stand sitting in bed not being able to do anything, or to shout across the house for my husband to come help me and do something. So off I go, turning on VoiceOver, and all should be well, right? Right? Again, not really, because I started hearing things like button, browse collection, page 1 of 14, adjustable, 54%. Water, efficient, 7.09. C, parents, babies, and kids. What does this all even mean? Well, as it turns out, this is what they mean. So C actually means PSI, which is the air quality index. 7.09 is not a character from Star Trek, but $7.09. And parents, babies, and kids is nothing nefarious, it's just a shopping category in the buy-sell app. So as you can see, they could be so much better. So now I'd like to share with you some ways you can actually improve accessibility for your users. So first, remember, context is king. Remember the last slide? So let's take a look at some examples. So here's a weather app. And let's see what happens when you use VoiceOver with this app. And I'll just focus on the top portion of the app. And here are all the accessibility elements in this section and what they say. If it looks overwhelming to you, it's because it is. What's fair? Icon WRMD mapper? I'm not even sure that I heard it right, let alone understand what it means. 33, 1 degree Celsius, If you don't have visual context of what they all mean, it's very hard to help, what do all these things mean? So let's see how we can improve this. Let's focus on the top navigation bar first. So we'll call these buttons 1, 2, and 3. For button 1, it's easy enough. We set the accessibility label to menu and all is good now, or VoiceOver will say menu, button. Button 2, which looks like an antenna, is actually a news and tips button. So let's call it that. So now it says news and tips, button. And that bell button on the right in button 3, it's actually a button to read all the weather alerts. So we could call it alerts, but alerts could mean a gajillion different things. So let's just call it weather alerts, clear and nice. And what about that middle section that says current location and the name of the app? If you're blind and traveling, you may not necessarily always know where you are or where exactly you are. So a good idea here might be to actually say the name or the locality of the area. So how might we be able to do that? Well, since we already have the user's let and lon, it's easy enough to actually write a function that reverse geocodes that location and return you the locality of the place mark. The locality property actually returns you the city or district associated with that location, so it's perfect for this case. So plugging in that into your label, now we can have something that says current location, Ang Mo Kio. And since we can also tap that button to change the location, it might also be a good idea to add a hint as well so that the user knows what the button action does. In this case, change your location. And what about this section? So instead of having 3 separate elements that the user needs to swipe through, we could combine them into one so that the user can swipe 4 times to iterate between these 4 elements instead of swiping 4 times to reach to the second element. So we can enable the parent view here as accessibility element and set the appropriate label. But remember in the previous slide that voiceover actually spelled PSI as C? Well, it's really easy to get voiceover to spell it out as PSI by adding dashes in between. So this way, voiceover will actually omit saying the dashes when it says it out, resulting in PSI. So let's take another good example here, which is Spotify. So Spotify has this really great feature called Daily Mix, where they recommend you some playlists based on songs that you listen to or like, and they're different each day. Now, Daily Mix tree doesn't really tell you much, does it? Wanna guess what you will hear when voiceover says this playlist? It says Daily Mix tree, Meatloaf, Queen, Bryan Adams and more, button. Awesome. Yeah. Next, prioritize useful content. So one of the ways to prioritize useful content is to remove content that's only useful to sighted users from the content navigation so that voiceover users can get to the content that's useful to them more quickly. A good example of prioritizing content is actually the Google Maps app. So there are only 4 things that the user can navigate to over here, which is the menu button, location search, voice search. And once you navigate through this tree, it skips everything else in between and goes straight to the directions button. Perhaps the developers felt that the most common use case for a voiceover user here is to actually get directions on how to get from one point to another, and they're very likely right. So they made a trade-off here, and by removing functionalities like the current location button, heading, or changing a map tiles, it makes it much easier for an unsighted person to get to the functions they are most likely to use quicker. And also, because a voiceover user will need to listen to a lot of spoken words all the time, so having to hear repetitive words or content that makes little sense to the user becomes very annoying after a while. So let's take a look at this Twitter app called Tweetbot. Now imagine how tedious it might be if redundant content such as profile photo keeps getting read row after row after row. Or it goes Sarah May, at Sarah May, emergency kittens, at emergency kittens. And if it's trying to read through a tweet storm, it's going to repeat the user's name and the username again and again and again and again. But Tweetbot's developers have done an amazing job of making the tweet reading experience really pleasant by condensing things that you see on screen into a concise label. So now if you try to read a tweet, it simply says, emergency kittens, constantly trying to impress my cat, 7 hours ago. It's really cool. Best Twitter account, by the way. And next, keep your accessibility labels and hints short and sweet. Many voiceover users don't even finish hearing what voiceover says before they swipe to the next element. Many also speed up the voice speed. And in my case, this is how my voiceover experience sounds like. Let's say this is the section that I want voiceover to speak out. And this is what I would hear. Oops, sorry. No audio?
Monday, the 16th of October 2017 at 12:49 p.m. when the plane takes off. Why doesn't the tail hit the runway? Have the news. Link.
If you think that's fast, many voiceover users, especially those who use it on a day in and day out basis, have it even faster. Okay then, so how can we keep our labels short enough for the user? First, omit describing what an element is. The control type of the element, for example, if it's a button or a slider or image, is already described in the accessibility trait for that element, and VoiceOver will automatically append that information where relevant. So if you had a label that said compose tweet button, what will happen is VoiceOver will read it as compose tweet button. So just remove what that element is, all right? VoiceOver will do it for you. Secondly, keep it short and sweet. Cut out words that you don't need. In this instance, compose a new tweet and compose tweet both mean the exact same thing, so use the shorter one. And thirdly, you don't need to actually describe the action that the user can take. VoiceOver will tell the user automatically what actions can be taken on a particular element. For example, double tap to open on buttons and links, or swipe up or down to adjust on sliders. And any additional information for the user can go into an accessibility hint instead, which is spoken after a short pause without the user input. So far, we've covered how to make good use of our accessibility labels and how to make them pleasant to use for our users. But VoiceOver is not the only way people with visual disabilities use accessibility tools. I might have used VoiceOver for the entire weekend, but on a day-to-day basis, I don't. What I do need, though, is text that is easy to read, as I have really bad eyesight and I don't have 20/20 vision even with correction. Or maybe you have low vision, or it could be somebody with cataracts. So how can we ensure high legibility in our app content? Well, first, use good contrast. Adding dark gray text on a black background like this really doesn't help for people with low vision to make out the text. Also, try not to make use of fonts that are too difficult to read, like ultra-thin font weights or small font sizes. You can actually use the iOS system font styles instead, or implement dynamic type in your app, which I will cover next. And thirdly, don't rely solely on colors to convey information. 1 in 12 males are colorblind, and if you rely solely on colors, colorblind users may actually lose important contextual information if those colors mean something. So try adding shapes or text to provide additional context. Remember that designing for colorblindness is also accessibility. Also, iOS has really made it very easy for users to actually customize their font sizes for what's comfortable for them, and that's through dynamic type. And with iOS 11, you can now use dynamic type with custom fonts, so if that was previously holding you back, there's really no excuse for you not to do it now. But dynamic type is not straightforward either, because to design for dynamic type means having to deal with things like, having to deal with the concept of responsive layouts. So responsive layouts, just like responsive web, are basically UI layouts that reflows and adapts its content, no matter how the elements change due to font increases or decreases. Where possible, you should use auto layout with integrity to build responsive layouts. How does this work in practice? So let's take a look at this calendar app. So you might have a UI layout that's fairly similar to this. You've got a table with fixed heights at the bottom, and the cells don't change no matter what's in the content. So it might be easy to actually set a fixed height for the top label and a fixed height for the bottom label. But fixed heights will mean that when the font size increases, because the height of the label doesn't, the text will eventually get truncated or cut off at the bottom. Instead, try to let text wrap around instead of truncating them, and allow your auto layout constraints to have variable content heights instead of fixed content heights. This way, a user can still read content properly without losing information because it was cut off. And yes, sometimes the UI can look really awful at larger fonts, and there's sometimes this urge to reset it to a smaller size that looks so much more beautiful on screen. I used to be one of those persons too, confession. But when I started to need to use larger font sizes, I stopped caring about how beautiful or not the design looks at larger sizes, because being able to read and use the app is more important to me. And over time, I got used to how it looks, and it really doesn't bother me anymore. So let your users choose what works best for themselves when using your app. Another thing that's new in iOS 11 that you can actually take advantage of as well is Smart Invert. Smart Invert allows the users to invert colors to reduce eye strain when looking at bright screens at night or in low light conditions. Unfortunately, this means a lot of photos end up getting distorted too. But you can tell iOS not to invert certain elements, such as photos, or an element that's already has a dark background color before inversion by setting this property to true. And finally, consider also adding SiriKit support into your app. The one biggest lifesaver for me when I was temporarily blind was actually the ability to do things via Siri that would otherwise be tedious to do with voiceover. For example, like sending text messages. Throughout the entire weekend, I used Siri to actually send messages to my husband to avoid having to keep shouting across the house for him to come over and help me do stuff. And I still actually use it regularly when I get wrist pain to reduce RSI. And another voiceover user might want to use Siri to do something else, like booking a ride. So thankfully, Grab actually has SiriKit support. And that's really awesome because I can actually book a ride to Orchard Road. And I could even choose what kind of ride I want. It might feel gimmicky for some people to say like, oh, you need to add Siri support to your app. But really, for some users, it's actually a godsend. And by the way, if you set Siri language to Singaporean English, yeah, it can even recommend you a kopitiam. And, accessibility is hard. No one said it was easy, and not everyone gets it right all the time. Not even Apple. Designing for accessibility is a process, one that takes a lot of thought and empathy to properly support. And it's not a do once, forget it thing. Whenever you add a new feature or change something, you need to always think and ask yourself, is this design accessible? How can I make it more accessible? Is there a feature that I can build to improve accessibility for our users? The iOS platform has made it really easy for us to actually make our apps more accessible or to adopt features that will make it more convenient for users to use our app, including those that I did not touch in my talk, such as haptic feedback or UI sounds. So please do make good use of it. And you should also try to test your apps using VoiceOver on yourself. Put on a blindfold, turn on VoiceOver, and see if you can still make sense of your app. And you can actually turn VoiceOver on in the Settings app of your iPhone by going to General and Accessibility, and then you can turn it on here. And if you scroll further down that screen, you can even, if you see down there, Accessibility Shortcut, you can even set it up as a triple-click home button shortcut to easily turn it on and off. And now, once you set it, you can actually triple-click your home button to access this, to turn it on or off quickly. Very nice. And, accessibility isn't just an abstract concept for a small group of people that we don't often think about. Just last week, I was at a conference where there was another person in the audience who's also blind in one eye. A few weeks before that, I sold an item online to a wheelchair-bound user. Disability can be temporary or situational too, like just like how I was temporarily blind once, or maybe when you're walking back home, carrying a big bag of groceries. Adding better accessibility support helps everyone, not just the permanently disabled. And the things that we take for granted as sighted people, such as, for example, shopping, is hard to do if you're blind. If you go to a shop, how do you know what you're buying if you can't see it? How do you know what's the price of an item? But well-designed apps make that possible for the blind to do shopping on their own, to know what they're buying, to be able to tell the price of an item, to even know if it's on discount, to be able to do it unassisted, to be able to work because you can use a computer. And this actually changes lives. And this is why accessibility is so important. Thank you. So I've also got some resources here which I will not cover, but I will share the slides so you can go check them out. Yeah.
Thank you, Jinny, for sharing us how to improve the accessibility in our apps. So does anybody have any questions for Jinny? Okay. If not, you can ask. Veena has a question.
Hi, Jinny.
Hi.
What would you suggest for an app that has a calendar? Like you mentioned, you have this page just now. Do we have to read out all the like one Monday to Tuesday, something like that? And secondly, what would you recommend to app that play around with the camera and like have to scan the QR code, kind of thing?
Sorry, can you repeat your first question?
Okay, the first question is if you have a calendar on your display, would you recommend to read out when the user has to select a day? Do you recommend to read it out?
If you need to have date selection, and I'm assuming that you use a date picker.
It's like a calendar just now, so it's like it's not a date picker, but it's already there on the display.
All right, so it's a
It's just like a button,
Okay.
a button, but it's clickable basically. But basically, the user has to pick a date.
right. Okay, so you can actually if it's a button, it should be simple enough. You could label it something like pick a date, and then the user double taps pick a date, and then that brings up the view for the user to actually pick the date. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think, yeah,
Okay.
I get it.
Anyone have any other questions? Okay, if you have any questions, ask Jinny after this. So let's give Jinny another round of applause.